It was dinner, and my brother blurted out in front of everyone, "She was never really part of this family." I froze. Every word cut deeper than I could imagine. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lena Cross. I'm 24. My brother Jace is 28, and our parents are Henry and Marla Cross. Growing up, I always felt invisible next to Jace. He was the golden child, smart, confident, everything our parents praise. Meanwhile, I was overlooked, my achievements dismissed, my feelings ignored. That night at dinner, it all exploded. We were sitting around the table with extended family, and Jace decided to humiliate me in front of everyone. His words weren't just cruel, they were calculated. He wanted me to feel small, to remind me that in his eyes, I didn't belong. My parents said nothing. They never defended me. Their silence felt like betrayal. I left the table without a word. I didn't pack, didn't explain, just drove. The city lights blurred past me as my mind raced. I realized something terrifying. The family I thought loved me didn't truly see me. That night, I made a decision. I would disappear and build a life they couldn't touch, a life they would regret underestimating. I moved to a small coastal town, rented a tiny apartment, and started working at a boutique law firm under my own name. I met Clara, a mentor who saw my potential and encouraged me to be confident. For the first time, someone believed in me completely. Slowly, I began to rebuild myself, piece by piece. Work became my sanctuary. I excelled, earned promotions, and began investing in my true passion, an art gallery. I made friends who valued me, and I realized I didn't need the approval of people who had only ever put me down. My independence became my strength, and every success fueled the fire I had been holding back for years. Months later, Jace crossed my path without realizing who I was. I was now L. Cross, confident, poised, and unstoppable. Seeing the surprise in his eyes gave me a quiet satisfaction. He didn't know I had transformed, didn't know he had lost me. Eventually, I returned to my hometown, not to beg for acceptance, but to show them what I had built without their support. I opened my gallery, and on opening night, I revealed myself. The shock on Jace's face was priceless. He finally saw me as I truly was: successful, confident, and untouchable. I confronted him calmly, reminding him how cruel he had been. My parents tried to justify themselves, but I walked away. I didn't need them. That night, I felt peace. Betrayal had hurt me, but I had turned it into strength. I reclaimed my life on my terms. I learned that no matter how deep the betrayal, self-worth and determination can rise stronger than anything. Growing up, I often felt like a shadow in my own home. While my brother Jace seemed to shine effortlessly, I struggled to get even a fraction of attention. Every achievement of his was celebrated, every word he spoke carefully praised. In contrast, when I did something good, it was brushed off or forgotten within minutes. Birthdays, school awards, even small victories. Jace's name always took the spotlight, while mine barely registered. It wasn't just the lack of recognition that stung. Jace had a way of making my life unnecessarily difficult. He would borrow my things without asking, break them, or hide them in places I could never find. One time, he smashed my favorite journal because he thought I was wasting space writing in it. Another time, my carefully built Lego set, a project I had spent weeks on, was thrown down the stairs while our parents weren't looking. I remember standing in the hallway, staring at the mess, my heart heavy, hoping someone would defend me. No one did. My parents looked away, said nothing, and in that silence, I learned that complaining only drew more scorn. There were other moments, smaller but no less significant, that built a quiet storm inside me. Jace would make offhand comments about my clothes, my hair, my choices, laughing as if they were jokes while I felt the sting behind the words. At the dinner table, he would monopolize conversations, twisting stories to make himself look clever, while my opinions and feelings seemed invisible. Even friends or neighbors who noticed my frustration would often shrug it off, saying, "Oh, Jace is just being Jace." That phrase became a kind of echo in my mind, a reminder that my experiences were never taken seriously. Despite all of this, I began to find small ways to protect myself. I learned to keep my emotions close, hiding my hurt so that Jace would have no satisfaction. I started organizing my own little projects, learning skills quietly without asking for recognition. I taught myself to cook from old recipe books, practiced sketching alone in my room, and spent hours reading about subjects that fascinated. These were small victories, invisible to everyone else, but they built a foundation I didn't yet realize would become my strength. By my teenage years, resilience had become second nature. I could endure Jace's cruelty without breaking down, even when it stung deeply. I learned to see the value in my own efforts, independent of the praise I never received. I became self-reliant, finding comfort in my ability to create, learn, and improve on my own. Even when parents overlooked me, I grew more confident in my skills, more aware that my worth did not need validation from the people who failed to see it. There were times when I felt frustration so sharp it almost overwhelmed me. I longed for recognition, for someone to notice the quiet struggles I endured. But every instance of betrayal, every unacknowledged achievement, pushed me to develop patience and strategy. I began to understand that my life would not be handed to me, and that if I wanted to matter, I had to make it happen myself. Looking back, those years of feeling invisible were shaping me in ways I could not yet name. The constant comparisons to Jace, the daily betrayals, and the endless silence from our parents forced me to build inner strength. I learned to navigate a household where love seemed conditional, to survive in a world where acknowledgement was rare, and to quietly nurture talents and passions that one day would become the pillars of my independence. By the time I reached adulthood, I was no longer just the overlooked child. I had become someone who could endure, adapt, and grow quietly, someone who could survive betrayal and emerge stronger than anyone expected. The small, unnoticed victories of my childhood were the seeds of a resilience that would one day change my life completely. The night started like any other family dinner, with the house buzzing with conversation and the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. Extended relatives had come over, cousins, aunts, uncles, and even a few distant family friends. The table was long and crowded, voices overlapping, glasses clinking, and laughter echoing through the dining room. I tried to keep my composure, quietly taking my seat at the far end, hoping to remain unnoticed as usual. But Jace had other plans. He leaned back in his chair, a smug smile curling on his lips, and began talking louder than everyone else. At first, it was small jabs, subtle remarks meant to belittle me in front of our guests. Then, with perfect timing, he said it. Honestly, I don't know why Lena even tries. She was never really part of this family. A hush fell over the table. My fork froze midair, my chest tightening as the words sank in. I felt heat rush to my face, embarrassment flooding every nerve. Eyes turned toward me, some shocked, some curious, others silently agreeing with him. My stomach dropped. I wanted to disappear right then and there, to vanish into the walls, but I stayed rooted, too stunned to move. The cruelest part was my parents' reaction, or rather, their lack of one. Henry and Marla exchanged brief glances, their expressions unreadable, and then continued eating as if nothing had happened. No words of defense, no attempt to calm the situation, not even a glance in my direction. Their silence was deafening, heavier than any insult Jace could have thrown. It told me, without a doubt, that my place in this family had always been conditional and fragile. As the dinner continued, Jace seemed to take even more pleasure in picking at me. He laughed openly at my attempts to join conversations, twisted my words, and even commented on my clothing in front of everyone. I noticed whispers among the relatives, half curious and half amused. Every comment chipped away at the already fragile confidence I had mustered over the years. I realized in that moment how easy it had been for them to erase me from their minds, to dismiss my existence and achievements, as if I were nothing more than a shadow of my brother. Anger bubbled inside me, hot and sharp. It mixed with a strange sense of clarity, a sudden understanding that the family I had relied on for support could no longer protect me or value me. My hands trembled slightly as I set my fork down, not from fear, but from determination. For the first time, I felt a spark ignite within me, a plan forming quietly, patiently. I would not continue to exist in a house where my worth was constantly questioned, where humiliation was routine, and where silence spoke louder than I excused myself under the pretense of needing fresh air. Outside, the cool night breeze brushed against my skin, and I inhaled deeply, letting it fill the emptiness left by betrayal. The anger inside me was no longer just pain, it was fuel. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the confines of that house, a life where I could reclaim control, dignity, and respect. That dinner, which had begun as a familiar routine, became a turning point. Every insult, every smirk from Jace, every quiet glance from my parents, only strengthened the resolve growing inside me. I realized I could no longer wait for validation from people who would never give it. Instead, I would create my own path, one where I was seen, acknowledged, and powerful. By the time I returned to the table, I had made a silent promise to myself. I would disappear, not out of fear, but as the first step toward building a life where no one could undermine me. That night marked the beginning of something I had never felt before: clarity, purpose, and the quiet determination to rise above betrayal. I stood from my chair without saying a word, the chatter and laughter fading behind me as I moved toward the front door. The polished hardwood floors of the dining room reflected the soft light of the chandelier, but I barely noticed it. My mind was a storm of emotions, anger, sorrow, and disbelief swirling together so tightly it was almost suffocating. Every step toward the door felt like shedding a layer of the person they thought they knew, the version of me they had always dismissed. The cool night air hit my face as soon as I stepped outside, and I felt a strange clarity mingled with pain. The streets were quiet, empty except for the occasional passing car, and I slid into my own vehicle with trembling hand. The engine roared to life, echoing my heartbeat, and I drove without a destination in mind. The world outside my window was a blur of lights and shadows, but nothing distracted me from the burning realization that had settled deep in my chest. The family I had trusted, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, didn't see my worth. As the miles rolled beneath the tires, memories flashed in my mind. Countless instances when my efforts had gone unnoticed, when my feelings had been brushed aside, and when Jace had deliberately undermined me. The latest insult at dinner wasn't the first, but it was the one that finally broke through the walls I had built around my heart. I felt betrayed in ways that words could barely capture. It wasn't just his words, it was my parents' silent complicity, their willingness to allow humiliation to stand unchallenged. They had taught me, without realizing it, that my presence was optional, my achievements irrelevant, and my existence secondary. Sorrow wrapped around me, heavy and persistent, and yet beneath it, a spark of defiance began to grow. I realized that staying in that house, surrounded by people who refused to acknowledge me, would only continue a cycle of pain. The life I had known, the one I had hoped would include love and recognition from my family, had been an illusion. If I wanted to be seen, if I wanted my voice to matter, I couldn't wait for them to change. I had to create a life where I could thrive without their approval, without their validation. The idea took shape gradually, almost quietly at first. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to vanish in a way that would allow me to rebuild myself, to start anew. I imagined a life where no one could undermine me, where my accomplishments were my own, and where my identity wasn't defined by the whims of others. Each mile I drove reinforced the decision, transforming sorrow into determination. I would disappear from their lives, not as a retreat, but as a strategy to reclaim control. By the time I reached the outskirts of the city, the anger I had felt at the table had sharpened into focus. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment of being overlooked had forged a new resolve inside me. I wouldn't allow my sense of self to be dictated by people who had never truly cared about it. I would forge a path where I could grow, succeed, and be recognized on my own terms. I parked on a quiet side street, inhaling deeply, letting the night air fill my lungs. For the first time in years, I felt a strange mixture of fear and liberation. Leaving wasn't easy, and I knew the journey ahead would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine. But I also knew it was necessary. The life I had been living was no longer mine to claim. It belonged to a family that had never seen me. With a steadying breath, I started the engine again. I was leaving behind more than just a house. I was leaving behind the chains of invisibility, betrayal, and neglect. Ahead of me stretched uncertainty, but also possibility. And for the first time in my life, I understood that disappearing wasn't running away. It was taking control of my destiny. The town I arrived in was nothing like the city I had left behind. It was quiet, with narrow streets that wound between pastel-colored houses and the faint scent of salt from the ocean drifting on the breeze. No one knew me here, and for the first time in years, I felt invisible in the way I had always longed to be. But this invisibility felt different. It was freedom. I could start over without expectations, without judgment, without the constant shadow of Jace's superiority. I rented a small, sunlit apartment near the edge of town. It was modest, almost bare, but every corner felt like a blank page waiting for me to write my own story. I unpacked only what I needed and carried the rest in my memory, leaving the remnants of my old life behind. Each item I set on a shelf, each window I opened to let in the fresh ocean air, felt like a declaration. This time, I would build something that belonged entirely to me. I needed work, so I took a position at a boutique law firm tucked into a quiet street downtown. The office was small, filled with the soft hum of computers and the occasional rustle of papers. The team was professional but welcoming, and I found solace in the routine, drafting documents, organizing files, researching cases. Every completed task, no matter how minor, gave me a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years. Slowly, confidence began to replace the uncertainty that had clung to me for so long. It was during these early months that I met Clara. She was a senior associate, sharp, perceptive, and unexpectedly warm. Unlike anyone I had known, Clara didn't measure my worth by my past or compare me to anyone else. She noticed the care I put into my work, the attention I gave to details others overlooked, and the quiet intelligence I often doubted in myself. In one of our first conversations over coffee, she said, "Lena, you have a talent for seeing things others miss. Don't let anyone make you forget that." Those words, simple yet powerful, planted seeds of belief in me that I hadn't realized had been dormant for so long. With Clara's guidance, I began to take small risks, volunteering for cases that challenged me, contributing ideas in meetings, even suggesting improvements to our office processes. Each success, no matter how small, was a victory, a reminder that I didn't need anyone's approval to validate my ability. Slowly, I started to see a version of myself that I had never dared to imagine, competent, capable, respected, and unafraid to claim space in the world. At the same time, a quiet plan began forming in the back of my mind. I didn't think about revenge in a reckless way. Instead, I thought strategically. I would build a life so complete, so successful, that Jace would be forced to acknowledge what he had dismissed. Every late night at the office, every extra effort I put into refining my skills, became a step toward that life. The vision I held wasn't about proving him wrong to the world. It was about proving to myself that I could thrive without him, without my parents, without the constraints of my past. The coastal town, with its gentle waves and slow pace, became the perfect backdrop for my transformation. I spent evenings walking along the shore, letting the rhythmic crash of water against rocks wash away the tension I had carried for years. Each day felt purposeful, each accomplishment a quiet rebellion against the life I had once endured. I began to recognize that my worth wasn't tied to family validation, nor could it be dictated by someone like Jace. I was learning to trust my instincts, honor my efforts, and plan for a future that belonged solely to me. In the quiet corners of my apartment, with the ocean stretching endlessly beyond the windows, I allowed myself to dream bigger than I ever had before. By the time 6 months had passed, Lena Cross, the invisible girl, had become someone else entirely. She was confident, poised, and deliberate. Every skill, every connection, every small victory was a thread in the tapestry of a life that Jace had no idea was unfolding. And deep down, I knew the day would come when he would realize the mistake of underestimating. Months passed, and the routine of my new life became the foundation for something I had never felt before: confidence. At the law firm, my work no longer felt like a series of small, unnoticed tasks. I was given responsibility for larger cases, and I embraced the challenges with determination. I learned to trust my judgment, make decisions without hesitation, and manage complex situations that once would have left me paralyzed with self-doubt. Promotions followed, not handed to me, but earned through persistence, skill, and a refusal to let past failures define me. Alongside work, I devoted time to a long-held dream: opening an art gallery. I had always loved art, its ability to tell stories without words, to evoke emotion and reflection. With the modest savings I had carefully accumulated, I found a small, charming space near the downtown area. The first pieces were simple, selected from local artists whose work spoke to me, but each edition was deliberate. Curating the gallery became more than a passion. It was a statement of my independence and vision. Every brushstroke, every sculpture, every photograph displayed under my care was a testament to a life I was building on my own terms. In the midst of professional growth and personal passion, I found myself forming connections that felt refreshingly genuine. I made friends who respected my boundaries and celebrated my victories without judgment or envy. There was Emma, a teacher who shared my love of literature and often spent evenings discussing books and life. Marcus, a chef with a quiet humor who taught me the simple joy of laughter. And Clara, who continued to mentor me, guiding me through challenges while helping me recognize my worth. These relationships reminded me that love and trust could exist outside of my family, and that genuine connections were not always conditional or competitive. Despite the growing happiness in my life, occasional invitations arrived from my hometown. Birthday parties, family gatherings, even casual dinners. My absence had become noticeable, and some relatives reached out with feigned warmth. Each time, I considered responding, but quickly realized these events were reminders of the environment I had escaped, not opportunities for connection. The thought of returning to judgment, whispers, and comparison was unbearable. Instead, I politely declined, choosing to protect the life I had painstakingly built. The invitations became markers of how far I had come, rather than temptations to revert to old patterns. Through this period, my confidence deepened in ways I hadn't expected. The gallery flourished slowly but steadily, attracting visitors who appreciated the space and the curation. My name began circulating in the small art community, not as Lena across the overlooked sibling, but as Lena, the curator, the visionary, the woman who had crafted a place of beauty and expression. I felt a quiet satisfaction every time a new artist entrusted me with their work, knowing that my judgment, taste, and dedication mattered. Work, friendships, and the gallery combined to create a life that was entirely mine. I no longer felt the weight of Jace's judgments or my parents' neglect. Each day reinforced the understanding that my past did not dictate my future. I had cultivated strength through independence, self-respect, and deliberate action. I was not merely surviving, I was thriving. As I walked along the beach one evening, the horizon glowing with the sunset, I reflected on the distance I had traveled. The girl who once cowered under comparison and rejection had transformed into a woman capable of love, trust, and achievement on her own terms. Invitations from the hometown came and went, but I didn't need them. I had built a life that demanded acknowledgement from no one but myself, and the power of that realization was exhilarating. In the quiet of the coastal town, surrounded by friends, work, and the gallery that symbolized my efforts, I finally felt a sense of mastery over my own story. The foundation had been laid, and the next chapters promised even greater growth. Jace and my family remained in the background, irrelevant to the woman I was becoming. The strength I had quietly nurtured was now undeniable, and nothing could undo the journey I had undertaken. It was a crisp morning when the encounter happened. I had an early meeting at a downtown investment firm, reviewing contracts for a new collaboration between the law firm and a client in real estate. I walked through the tall glass doors, my heels clicking softly against the polished floors, carrying a leather briefcase that held more than papers. It carried months of effort, strategy, and quiet victory. I introduced myself as L. Cross, a name I had chosen to shield my past and present my professional self, distinct from the girl Jace had known. The room was filled with executives discussing projections, timelines, and investment risks. I adjusted my jacket and reviewed notes silently, observing the room with the calm precision I had cultivated over months of disciplined work. And then I noticed him, leaning casually against the far wall, reviewing a portfolio. My heart skipped briefly, though my face remained neutral. There was no mistaking him, Jace. The same confident posture, the familiar smirk that had haunted so many of my younger years. He hadn't seen me yet, and I could feel the tension building quietly inside me. A subtle thrill ran through me as I realized he wouldn't recognize me immediately. I allowed a small, controlled smile to brush my lips, savoring the moment. All those years of underestimation, all the subtle humiliations and dismissals, had brought me here, to a place where my accomplishments spoke louder than words. I didn't need to prove myself to him, but I did want to witness the surprise when he realized who I had become. The meeting began, and I presented our proposal with confidence, articulating strategies, risks, and benefits with clarity. My voice was steady, deliberate, and commanding. I noticed him glancing at me occasionally, raising an eyebrow as he listened. There was a flicker in his expression, an unspoken curiosity mixed with disbelief. He did not yet connect the poised professional in front of him with the girl he had dismissed all those years ago. Each slide, each point I made, reinforced the vision I had built for myself, the reputation I had earned quietly but diligently. During a break, he approached me, offering polite conversation. "L, right?" he said, his tone casual, but his eyes betrayed a trace of scrutiny. I nodded, extending a hand with practiced ease. "Yes, that's correct. Pleased to meet you." The firmness of my handshake and the steady eye contact seemed to rattle him subtly. He smiled, slightly forced, and shifted the conversation to business, but I could sense him studying me, searching for something familiar. I, meanwhile, kept my composure perfectly intact. Inside, a quiet satisfaction spread through me. He had no idea that the woman he was addressing was Lena Cross, the girl he had ridiculed and ignored. Watching his reactions, the subtle hesitation, the brief flashes of recognition that he didn't yet fully process, gave me a strange sense of triumph. It wasn't arrogance. It was validation of the life I had built without him, independent of the judgments that had once defined me. By the end of the morning, the meeting concluded successfully. Contracts were signed, plans were approved, and I left with a sense of accomplishment that was entirely my own. Jace lingered for a moment, glancing in my direction, perhaps beginning to piece together something familiar, but unable to name it. That uncertainty, the brief window where he could not reconcile the professional woman before him with the sister he had belittled, was exquisite in its subtlety. As I walked away, I felt a surge of empowerment unlike anything before. The quiet satisfaction of this first encounter, the knowledge that I had grown into someone he could no longer dismiss, lingered in my mind. I had evolved beyond the girl he had mocked, and yet he remained unaware of the full scope of my transformation. It was a moment of silent victory, a small taste of the reckoning I had long envisioned, and the beginning of a chapter in which I would define myself entirely on my own terms. After months of establishing myself professionally and personally, I knew it was time to take the next step. My life in the coastal town had given me strength, independence, and clarity, but part of me still yearned for a subtle reckoning with the past. I didn't seek confrontation or revenge through anger. I wanted a statement, a demonstration of what I had built on my own terms. Carefully, I began orchestrating what I thought of as my comeback, a return that would be felt more than spoken. I scouted properties back in my hometown under the guise of business investments, careful to avoid recognition. One building caught my attention immediately, a neglected, spacious structure in the heart of the old downtown district. It had been overlooked for years, passed by my family without interest or notice. To me, it was perfect, a blank canvas where I could create something remarkable, a place that could silently tell a story of independence and ambition. I purchased it quietly, leaving no trace connecting the acquisition to Lena Cross. Renovations began immediately, with architects and designers unaware of the personal significance behind every choice. Walls were painted to enhance natural light, spaces reconfigured for exhibitions, and a small cafe added to draw visitors. Every decision was deliberate, crafted to ensure that this gallery would become a high-profile destination, respected not just for its collection, but for its vision and the thoughtfulness behind it. Word of the gallery spread slowly through the art and business community. Local papers ran small features, highlighting the innovative space and the way it revived an overlooked part of town. I heard rumors, sometimes whispered by business contacts, other times caught in casual conversation, that people were curious about the owner. Jace, as it happened, was among them. He visited the town on business shortly afterward, intrigued by reports of a new gallery generating attention and praise. When he arrived, I did not immediately reveal myself. I remained behind the scenes, observing him as he moved through the gallery, clearly impressed by the displays, the layout, and the way the space seemed to pulse with life. The satisfaction I felt was quiet, internal, a knowledge that the person who had once dismissed me was witnessing a version of my life that he could never diminish. Every detail of the gallery had been arranged to reflect professionalism, creativity, and success, qualities he had refused to recognize in me years ago. Subtle moments were my tools. I ensured he noticed the curated art pieces, each selected with care to reflect strength, resilience, and innovation. I arranged meetings with staff who spoke of the owner's vision and dedication, careful to frame it as an example of initiative and intelligence. Jace's brow furrowed in curiosity and admiration, though he still did not connect the dots completely. He was captivated by the gallery, unaware that the woman behind its existence was the same sister he had undermined and mocked. I watched him linger in corners, examining displays and reading plaques, and I felt an unspoken triumph. Every glance he gave the exhibits, every approving nod, was a silent acknowledgement of my abilities without requiring my direct assertion. He had underestimated me for years, but now, through deliberate planning and careful orchestration, I allowed him to see what he had lost, what he had ignored in favor of his own ego and pride. The gallery became a statement in itself, a place of achievement, creativity, and autonomy. For Jace, it was an indirect revelation, and for me, it was an affirmation. The careful arrangement of space, the deliberate acquisition, and the choice to remain unseen initially, all of it was part of a plan that allowed him to confront, slowly and subtly, the reality of my transformation. I didn't need dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. The impact lay in the quiet, deliberate way my life had unfolded without him, a life he could no longer control or diminish. By the time he left the gallery, his admiration was clear, mingled with confusion. I let him carry that uncertainty, knowing the full recognition would come in its own time. The plan had worked. He had glimpsed the version of me he had never taken seriously, and the satisfaction of that subtle revelation was more powerful than any confrontation could have been. The gallery was buzzing with excitement on the day of the family reunion I had quietly arranged. I had sent invitations under the pretense of a professional art showcase, knowing the allure of a high-profile exhibition would draw many from my hometown. The space gleamed with fresh paint, carefully lit sculptures, and paintings arranged to guide visitors through a narrative of creativity and ambition. Every detail had been designed to impress, but the real reveal would be far more personal. I watched from the mezzanine as guests arrived, recognizing familiar faces from childhood, relatives who had once overlooked or ignored me. I kept my distance, observing quietly as they admired the exhibits, unaware of the owner who had brought it all together. And then I saw him, Jace. His posture stiffened the moment he stepped in, scanning the space with an expression that flickered between curiosity and incredulity. For a heartbeat, I allowed myself to savor the moment, knowing the shock he would feel when recognition finally settled in. When our eyes met, I stepped forward, letting my presence fill the room. "Hello," I said calmly. My voice carried authority, poise, and a serenity he hadn't anticipated. The air between us shifted instantly. Recognition dawned slowly in his eyes, and I could see the disbelief, the abrupt awareness of who I had become. No smirk, no arrogance. Only the stunned realization that the sister he had belittled for years now stood before him as a woman in command of her life, her work, and her destiny. The room seemed to fade around us as I guided him to a quiet corner, away from the murmurs of other guests. I wanted this moment private, personal, and undeniable. "Do you see now?" I asked softly, letting my words hang. This is what I built. Despite everything you did, despite the way you and our parents dismissed me, I thrived. I didn't need your approval, your validation, or your recognition to succeed. I created something that belongs entirely to me. Jace's expression faltered. He opened his mouth to speak, but found nothing that could capture the enormity of the realization. I continued, my tone even unwavering. Do you remember all those times you mocked me? All the moments you made me feel invisible, insignificant, unworthy? I remembered every one of them, and I used that pain to drive myself, to make a life that you could never have imagined I was capable of. I didn't just survive, I flourished. He swallowed hard, the weight of the truth pressing against him. I could see a flicker of shame, a moment of regret, but I said nothing more. Words beyond that were unnecessary. The quiet strength I projected, the calm authority in my posture, and the clear evidence of my accomplishments spoke louder than any argument could. My parents stepped forward, voices awkward, attempts to justify their silence and inactions spilling out in hesitant murmurs. They tried to explain their behavior, to excuse the neglect, but I had no patience for it. Their words were hollow, empty attempts to reconcile with someone they had failed for years. I shook my head gently, feeling the final weight of their judgment lift from my shoulders. I don't need your excuses, I said firmly. I have everything I need right here, my work, my choices, and my life. This gallery, my success, my independence, these are mine alone. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in a mixture of awe, guilt, and confusion. The rest of the evening passed around me in a blur, but I moved through it with a lightness I had never known, free from the chains of their approval or disapproval. For the first time in my life, I felt complete liberation. The confrontation was over, not with anger or bitterness, but with quiet certainty. I had shown them what they had ignored, faced them with my truth, and walked away without needing their acknowledgement. Every step I took through the gallery that night was a testament to the life I had claimed for myself, a life built from resilience, determination, and the refusal to let the past define me. After the gallery event, I retreated to my office, closing the door behind me. The soft hum of the lighting system and the muted sound of footsteps in the main space gave me a rare moment of solitude. I sank into my chair, letting my body relax in a way it hadn't in years. The adrenaline of confronting my past had passed, leaving only a calm clarity, a sense that every step I had taken, the pain, the struggle, the careful planning, had led me here. I thought about the girl I had been, the one who quietly endured dismissal, the one whose achievements had been overlooked, the one whose existence had been questioned. That girl had carried a weight so heavy it had almost crushed her spirit. But she had also carried something else: determination, resilience, and a quiet fire that refused to die. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every moment of being underestimated had become fuel for growth. I realized that my past, painful as it was, had shaped me into someone capable of more than I could have imagined. Pain had transformed into power. Looking around the office, at the carefully arranged sculptures and paintings, I recognized that each piece reflected a piece of my journey. Each artwork was a testament to patience, to vision, to the courage to create despite uncertainty. This space was no longer just a gallery. It was a living representation of my independence. No one had handed me this life. I had earned it piece by piece, decision by decision. I reflected on my relationships as well. The friends I had chosen, the mentors who guided me, the people who valued me without judgment, they were my chosen family. Their support, kindness, and belief in my potential were the pillars of the life I had built. I no longer relied on the validation of people who had never truly understood me. Recognition from my family had become irrelevant, their opinions a background noise I no longer had to bear. I had proven to myself that self-worth comes not from acceptance, but from perseverance, competence, and authenticity. I allowed myself to remember the confrontations, the strategic unveiling of my success, and the subtle satisfaction of seeing Jace realize what he had missed. Those moments were not about revenge, they were about acknowledgement of my own growth. I had orchestrated a path that reflected my capabilities, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my narrative. The satisfaction was quiet but profound. It did not need applause, only acknowledgement from myself that I had transformed pain into triumph. As I gazed out the window at the evening sky, painted with streaks of orange and pink over the coastline, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. I no longer carried the burden of resentment or the weight of past neglect. The sense of inadequacy that once clung to me like a shadow had vanished. I understood fully now that the only approval I needed was my own, and the only life I had to justify was the one I had intentionally crafted. In this reflection, I recognized the ultimate lesson: betrayal can wound, but it cannot define. Resilience and determination are far more enduring than judgment and criticism. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and ignored, Yet I had turned every setback into a stepping stone. Each decision I made to step away, to invest in myself, to trust my instincts, had culminated in a life of independence, purpose, and fulfillment. I smiled softly, feeling a rare and complete contentment. The gallery, the work, the friends I had nurtured, the quiet victory, these were my proof that I had reclaimed my life entirely. I had navigated betrayal, risen above neglect, and constructed a reality where my worth was undeniable. No longer defined by others, I was finally free, grounded in the understanding that resilience, self-respect, and unwavering effort always prevail. Pain had taught me strength, and strength had brought me peace. In that moment, I felt closure. I had survived, grown, and triumphed. My journey had been mine alone, and it had led me to a life I could claim fully, with no one's permission required. Betrayal had hurt, yes, but in the end, self-worth and perseverance always win. Do you think I did the right thing by walking away from my family, or should I have given them another chance? I'm really curious to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.